Okay, excellent. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. This is Cesar Trabanco from the Global Chamber, and this is our second event in a row today. And we will be having Sarita Jackson, member of the Global Chamber Los Angeles chapter, and she will be discussing an interesting topic. That's exporting services, and Sarita and I were talking, I think, back in December, and we were talking about how you see all the news about globalization and how trade has been affected, and that trade is not probably not the same as before. But we both agree that trade in services is something is growing, is increasing, and a lot of out of and working from away, that's all services, and many of our members are in the service industry. And I thought, say that we should definitely do a webinar about this, and here we are. So, Sarita, without further ado, I'll give you the floor. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Cesar, and for everyone who's on the call today, and especially those that are doing the whole back-to-back thing. I really appreciate it because this is a really an important message with regard to international trade. So thank you, Cesar, for allowing me to have this platform and to really discuss international trade in services. So from a services perspective. And before I continue, everyone hears me just fine. It's clear, right? I just want to make sure the audio is just fine. Great. Thank you, Jacob. All right. So as Cesar mentioned, when we talked toward the end of last year, I said a lot of the talks that we have when it comes to international trade are focused on goods. I mean, even when you think about the pandemic, when we were towards the latter part of the pandemic, it was all of this discussion about the supply chain disruption and what this means for those that are moving goods, that are importing or exporting, and that trade has slowed down. And there were even talks about this moving away from globalization. However, being a researcher, and that's what the whole Global Research Institute of International Trade is all about. And I will, weave in how I got into this space. So I won't give the standard introduction, but weave in how I got into this space. But as I was looking and being a service provider myself, when you actually look at the numbers, which I will show some of that here, actually global trade and services, yes, it did decline in 2020 briefly, but it recovered, and you will see the growth from 2020 to 2021, 2021 to 2022, and even what we're expecting with regard to 2023 and up until this year, that you saw trade and services increase. So that's where I said, okay, we really need to talk about trade and services. And when you look at the numbers for many of the countries, me being right here in the United States, so I'm coming to you from Los Angeles, California, all the talk about decline in trade, etc. But we were ignoring the fact that we've had a surplus in services, and what that means is we export more services than we bring in. And this is not anything that's new just within the last few years. This has been over a period of time. And myself, being a service provider through my own company, so GRIIT has been in business for now 11 years. But prior to that, I worked for a consulting firm where I would provide professional services in the early 2000s to different parts of the world, Southern African region, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And I do this work also in Spanish. That's a service that we were providing. So I saw firsthand what it was like to provide a service overseas, and working with other service providers who weren't consultants. These were professional service providers, legal services, accounting services, financial services, broadly speaking. When I moved back to Los Angeles, so I've been all over the world and all throughout the United States, but just to make a long story short, when I moved back to Los Angeles in 2013 to start my own firm, I attended a trade talk put on by the Department of Commerce and other local, state and local agencies. And all of it was about goods, tangible goods. And I stood up and I asked, I said, well, what are the statistics with service providers? Because we see a lot of services that are being provided overseas. And I remember one of the individuals on the panel said, well, we don't have those numbers. So I thought, okay, we've got to do something about this. Then I started teaching courses in business schools. And I would talk about goods and services. But as I tried to find a text or some resources, that information was so highly technical about what's happening at the WTO level, the agreements in services and what they mean. But it was difficult to find anything very practical that a business owner could take away on, okay, I'm a service provider, I want to provide a service, how do I go about doing it? So that was the other challenge I felt. And I remember a student asking me, Dr. Jackson, well, do you have a book on services? Not really. Only what I tell you, hence me writing a book, a practical guide on trade and services. And then finally giving workshops on how to export a service, same thing. Most of the people in the room were service providers. They weren't manufacturers or agricultural producers. Most of them were service providers. And I remember a gentleman coming up to me, and this was another workshop that was sponsored by the US government, saying, we need more workshops on services. So here I am, I took action. I didn't just, hey, we need to talk about services, but to take action to try to bring this issue to the forefront, as well as to provide some information that exporters can use. So that's what I'm here to do today, that I have to do this, I'm doing it. And so here's some information to get us started and that we can put into practice for our own businesses. Okay. Okay. All right. So that's the background on how I got here. And again, just in terms of what you're going to see today, comes from the text that I wrote. And like I said, it's a very practical, simple, practical, yet thorough guide. Also, I developed an online course for a very basic online course for service providers that want to know what are the steps so that I can provide a service and provide a benefit overseas and start to expand as well as to grow my business. Okay, so this is where we are going to go today, just to give you a sense of how this today is structured. Starting off with the status of global services exports and potential opportunities. Then we'll talk about just 3 key steps, very basic steps, easy to get started on exporting a service. Then I will discuss some of the case studies from my work with clients, as well as those that are in the text where I interviewed other business owners and mainly small business owners who are also exporting a service and the lessons that they learned and shared with regard to exporting a service. And then the next steps to provide you with some resources that you can take away from today's session. Now, as I go through this, it's hard for me to really see everyone, but if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question as I go through the presentation, or if there are any questions, you can put them in the chat and perhaps I can attend to the questions at the end during the discussion. All right. So when we look at the current status of global exports, the whole point is to, well, what are the opportunities in the global economy? As you can see here, just looking at 2021, the services sector outranks agriculture and industry, even though that's what we talk about. But ignore this huge component of our global economy, what contributes to the gross domestic product globally speaking. And as we see, services ranks just about 64% to the global GDP. When we look at it over a period of time, as I said in my opening remarks, this is not anything that is new. This has been going on for a while now. As you can see, going back to even the 1990s, nevertheless, we're still talking about manufacturing and agricultural, in other words, tangible products. And I'm not saying that that is not important, but why are we ignoring this huge component of the global economy when it comes to our policies, when it comes to practices, when it comes to the services that we provide to the business community when we're talking about international trade in general? So you can just see from the second graph that even in the 1990s, that the services accounted for just a little bit over 60% in its share of the world GDP, and has just continued to increase well into the 21st century. Again, let's look at the state of global services exports to identify those potential opportunities. When we're talking about services exports, just to be clear, it's mainly your professional services. And in 2021, we see the top services exports: accounting, transport, telecommunications, computer and information services. Now, the areas where we did see a decline, understandably so, was in travel because of the pandemic in the last few years is what I'm referencing when I say the decline. When it comes to travel, also when it comes to hospitality. So those types of services we could expect because of the lack of travel. However, other services continued to really see growth, and especially when it comes to telecommunications, right? What did everybody start to get on? Zoom, right? Zoom and other similar platforms just to communicate around the world and provide services through that platform. Me being a professor, teaching courses, providing educational services overseas. In terms of the top services exporters, the United States, the United Kingdom, and China, and you can see the dollar value there. So the United States is the leading services exporter globally, followed by the United Kingdom. And total, this is the part I really want to highlight. This is a $7.1 trillion market. And from 2021 to 2022, there was a 15% increase in the global trade and services. So again, why are we ignoring this? But that's why I'm here, so that we can bring this issue to the forefront and to get many of the service providers involved, where you're not just providing a service domestically, or if you are attempting to, where you know how to get started so that you can do so effectively and efficiently. And this is just to show, just specifically with the United States, I show this graph because here in the United States, when we talk about international trade, and in the last few years, there's this fear about international trade. Oh my goodness, we have a huge trade deficit, which means that we import more than we export, which contributes to this unequal trade balance. And don't get me wrong, I get it, I understand it. And yes, we want to reduce that trade deficit. But you see here where that deficit is really when it comes to goods. And then there is a surplus in services. And it's that services sector, that surplus, meaning that we export more services than we import, that lowers that trade balance. Okay, and we're just a few more with regard to the state of global trade and services, and now what it has, the impact at the national level. And then we'll get into some of the practical discussion. When we see with the UK, the percentage of the GDP is above 70% and continues to increase, but within that 70% range of the UK's GDP from 2018 to 2022. When we look at Asia, the top two countries, or Japan being among the top countries where the services sector is a high percentage of its GDP. You can see with Japan over 60%, and that has increased from 2018 to 2022. China hovers around 50%, 52%. Still a good portion of its GDP. Okay. When we look at the African region, so I do a lot of work when it comes to Africa, as I mentioned earlier, doing consulting, traveling, working on projects mainly in the Southern African region. We see here, looking at South Africa, Kenya, and Ghana, that at least for South Africa and Kenya, it's above 50% in terms of the services sector's percentage of the GDP. Ghana is just a little over 40%, under 50%. North America, and looking at the individual North American countries, the United States, Canada, and Mexico, same, above 50%. Mexico, around 60%, Canada, 70%, and then the United States, 80% of its GDP. Okay. So that gives you a sense of the landscape here in terms of why this is an important topic to discuss, because of the huge contribution to the global GDP, where we see an increase in the services trade year to year, even during the pandemic. Not until the services trade did not increase coming out of the pandemic, but even during the pandemic, while many of your mainstream news reports were talking about what's happening with the movement of goods, that there's a restriction on the movement of goods, that we still saw services showing an increase and growth and really playing an important role. And then looking internally at the national level economies to see what impact it just has on the national level GDP, or the share of that GDP. Now we're going to look at tips just to get started. So now that you see, yes, this is worth talking about, especially considering that it contributes more to the GDP than the other sectors. Now let's look at how to get started. So today is just going to be very broad and general, 3 easy key steps to get you started, and I will discuss each in detail with the time that we have. So when we're talking about the customized market research, that is the very first step to exporting a service. Now, why do I say this? I've given talks and I usually get the skeptical looks about, okay, why do I need to do research? Oh, I can just go Google, or I can just travel. Well, I'll give you one example, and this is going to be repeated in the when I talk about case studies. But I think about one of my clients who was an engineer that was in business for quite a while. And when we met, he was spending a lot of his own money trying to do research, having talks with people, traveling to the country that in which he wanted to do business, traveling to this country and having a lot of talks. And when he became my client, I said, well, so what has come of it? I mean, I keep hearing about all of these great conversations with great people, but are you doing business in that market? No, well, I'm still talking. And I said, well, this is why we need to do research, not in an ad hoc form. I know someone here, I know someone there. And then a number of years later, we're still having that same conversation. When I say research, it's doing it in a systematic form to guide a focused strategy, which in turn, number one, minimizes your risk when you're expanding globally, and saves you a lot of time, energy, and money, and then allows you to really understand the opportunities, the abundance of opportunities, and how to leverage those opportunities. So when I talk about customized market research, starts with classifying your services. I'm sure many people on the call are used to when we talk about goods, moving goods, you classify your goods with what's called a harmonized systems code, or here in the United States, we use the harmonized tariff systems code to understand how you classify your good, to look at the trends with the movement of goods, and then also when it comes to knowing the duty rates on that good when it's coming into the United States or when a good is entering any other market around the world. But I'm sure probably many of you have not heard about classifying your service. When you classify your service, there is a resource where there are numbers assigned. Now it has nothing to do with duty rates because this is, these are intangible. This is an intangible item, but it helps us to know what that classification is, to identify the specific type of service that we're talking about and look at the trends with regard to that service from one country to the next. So that's the starting point, classifying the service, looking at the trends, getting that data on if I am providing legal services. What are we seeing with regard to legal services in another country? Or what are we, or what are we seeing with regard to the import of a service into my home country? The next step is to identify the opportunities. And again, yes, you can have opportunities. I met someone here, or I read something on Google, but again, to have as much information, that's one of the things that my clients appreciate about me, that having the systematic approach, they can have as much information so they can make the best possible decisions, not generalized information that may or may not apply, or have one piece of information while ignoring a lot of other things that that could help them. So what do I mean by that? Country opportunities. That is simply by doing that research, looking at the exports, the trends when it comes to the provision of a service in another market, identifying a market where you could provide a service. Now, and that can go either way, where we see, all right, from country A to country B, we see that there has been an increase of this service. There is an opportunity in that market. Or it could be, well, we don't see this particular service in this market. However, there is a need for that service. There is an opportunity. So that's the first step of looking at taking this information and interpreting it, making it make sense for your company, and selecting the best market. And usually when I'm working with clients, we look at, the top 3 to 5 markets, and then we'll start with the first market. And if there may be some risks in that market that they cannot handle, then we'll look at market 2 or 3, 4 or 5. The business opportunities. Okay, so that also gets down to looking at it from a firm or a business level. What other businesses are are operating in that market? Understanding the demand in that market, the demographics in that market, the need in that market. And then policies. This is one that both with goods and services that a lot of companies overlook, the policy. Because they may say, oh, well, because, this is just something that is a government thing where you have government people fighting over the policy. No, not necessarily, because they're making the decisions that have an impact on your business and its ability to compete overseas. When I say policies, I'm referring specifically to trade agreements, and that is an area of expertise that I have. That's how I got into international trade to begin with, studying trade agreements and the negotiations, how they're negotiated, and how businesses have an impact on the outcomes of those negotiations. And so it is these trade agreements that do not only speak to manufactured goods or agricultural commodities, they also have a section for service providers, different types of services, and rules regarding that particular service, and how countries that are members of that trade agreement are supposed to interact when it comes to the movement or the import and export of services among those member countries. So when I work with many clients and they say, okay, I want to enter this particular market, I say, well, let's start with the trade agreements where you may have easier access, because when it comes to services, it may minimize the barriers or the regulations that may serve as a barrier to entering that market. Okay, I heard a mic come on. I just want to pause for a bit if anyone has a question. Okay, all right, if not, I shall continue. Okay, then of course, with your research, you understand the risks and gather data on the overall environment. I'll just put it in simple terms. The SWOT analysis. As a business, do an assessment, an honest assessment of your business strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Then when we look at the particular market, once you identify a market worth that where you could possibly provide your service, to look at the opportunities and threats in that market, and also a pestle analysis, looking at what is happening politically, economically, socially, technologically. And this technologically one is very, very important. Where I see where someone says, I want to provide this service, let's say education in another market. Well, you have to make sure that your potential clients or the end user has the technology to utilize that service if that's the route that you're going to go, if you're not going to be on ground. So that's very important. Environment, legal matters. So that's basically summarizing what the customized market research looks like, while also adding to start with those trade agreements that also includes chapters or discussions about services. Then you develop an export plan and strategy. Of course, base your plan and strategy on the customized market research. So let me just give a few nuggets with regard to your plan and what the plan should include. Of course, your research findings, what market you're going to consider, then to do an assessment, an honest assessment of your company. And what that means is you really look at, well, what are my resources or my firm's resources, my capabilities, and the capacity to provide that service. Then doing what I just mentioned, the pestle analysis, look at that to your plan, and then also understand the costs for providing that service in that market and using that to develop your strategy for moving forward in that market. And then finally, to identify resources to export effectively. There are a number of resources when it comes to funding. One thing I'll just mention that, and that's here in the United States, and each state is different. So depending on the state that you're in, you're going to have to check to see if this is offered in your state and the amount. But there's what's called a STEP grant, where both, regardless of what you're producing, if you're just exporting, this whole grant is designed to push exports, encourage small businesses to export. And there are resources to offset some of the costs. So service providers can also utilize this, offset some of the costs. Let's say if you're translating your website for another market in a different language, to attend trade shows where you're also exhibiting your service at some of these shows or exhibits, getting market research, those types of things, that's one. But when it comes to the larger, regardless of where you are, you have these different multilateral development agencies. Me personally, I'm familiar with the U.S. Agency for International Development, having to go after many of those contracts, working with the firm and securing those contracts, working with the team to get those contracts. You also have the World Bank, your regional banks, African Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, Asian Development Bank. So those are ways to get the resources to cover some of your projects to provide a service. And you're going to hear this with the clients where they're traveling, and I'm talking to this one and I'm talking to that one, and I will point them in the right direction and say, why not? Yes, it's time consuming, but why not start going after contracts, bidding on contracts, collaborating with other companies to bid on that contract, even if you're a subcontractor, because that way you can provide your service and then you know that you're going to get paid. So you don't have to deal with any kind of, I met this person, this happened, I didn't get paid, or there are some challenges. And I actually just a few weeks ago with someone that is trying to provide a service where there were some challenges, and that person had to take legal action to prevent people from going directly to that person's clients and all of these other things. So if you bid on contracts, sometimes it minimizes the risk, provides a bit more security so that you could just focus on providing your service. And if anyone has questions or offline, we can talk about that some more. And then, of course, technology. And when I refer to technology in my book, I talk about this, of course, with e-commerce. E-commerce is not just about moving goods. And there is someone who focuses on e-commerce and international trade. And in the text, in my book, she goes into details. Only for the interest of time, I'm going to just keep it very brief, but where she goes into details as to how she works with service providers to use e-commerce to expand globally as well. Blockchain technology. Blockchain technology, we've seen that is not just about Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, but also with the efficient movement paperwork when it comes to logistics and all of the paperwork that you have to fill out when moving goods, your bill of lading, commercial invoice, certificate of origin, etc. And in the logistics industry, we've seen where blockchain has allowed for the more efficient use or of making it more efficient when it comes to documentation. There are now other platforms that are arising. One I've been following for the last few years, where I see now they're promoting their services with regard to reducing the amount of paperwork and having the tangible paper, putting things electronically so that the process moves much more efficiently. And then, of course, artificial intelligence, AI. So I will admit I don't have too much to say on that. I did talk about it in my book, but I'm still following it to see how it is working when it comes to services, and following the discussions where it has an impact on certain services, whether in a positive or not so positive. But nonetheless, I do encourage still understanding, embracing the technology, and seeing how you can leverage it so that you can still be competitive. Okay, so with regard to the case studies, a lot of the firms, the services-based firms that I've worked with or organizations have been in the educational, legal, engineering firms, business advisory firms, so on and so forth, the list that you see here. And I just want to share some of the results, how I took this 3-step approach to produce results for my clients. So going back to that engineering firm that I mentioned earlier, where the person was spending a lot of his own money trying to provide a service and a product, and it was a really good product and great service that definitely was useful, but spinning his wheels for years on end and really not getting anywhere to get into that particular market. So what we did was I did that assessment. We did a very deep dive diagnostic, not just are you ready to export, yes or no, but I mean, this was a diagnostic of over 70 questions, and where we met and went through each and every one of those questions to really see, do you have the resources, the capacity, the capability to expand to this market, so that we can identify those areas where he's strong, and then the areas where we may need to build the capacity to export that particular service. But the key thing that came out of it was the fact that he was spending so much of his own money. So that was really the problem that I wanted to solve, in terms of how do you save your money and minimize the risks of not getting paid. Let's say you do get business in that market. And that was where we went through looking at some particular contracts and grants that he could tap into, because he was unaware of that. So that was a milestone in and of itself, just to become aware of some of the ways of getting some funding, access to capital for his particular service. And so he did bid on a contract and everything. So that was a good step in the right direction. The legal as well, where through my network, where I was able to connect him with someone, an attorney, based in Mexico, that I knew that is one of my trusted advisors, connect him with an attorney that can help him with the legal matters and to move things forward. And so then, he can move forward with sharing his expertise, and that has a social benefit and economic development benefit. And another client that I've worked with more so in the educational space, taking the same approach, that I was really happy just to see this year, saw an increase in export sales by 8.2%. So these are just a couple of results with regard to the work that we do, working with service providers and providing them with the space and the resources so that they are no longer overlooked and having to figure all of this out by themselves. Next steps. So here are just a few resources to take away, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Okay, one, the book that I mentioned, International Trade and Services. If you want more details about anything that I've talked about here, especially when it comes to the trade agreements, how to leverage that, how to put together a plan. There is a step-by-step guide, and how to actually do that, not just this is what you need to include, but this is how you do it. And here are resources to collect information. The funding, it also provides a list of different sources and how to put together a bid on a contract. This is based on my experience, as I mentioned, working for a firm where we had a big team. With my own firm, we do the same thing. I actually have several bids out now. I've returned to bidding on contracts. However, but the experience working with a small firm and traveling all around the world and being a part of a team to get those contracts, I share that information on how to put together a proposal, the basics of a successful proposal, and how to network and get yourself out there through some of the platforms as well, where people are looking for subcontractors. If a large company is looking for a subcontractor, how you can make yourself visible. All of that is in the text as well. You can get that on Amazon, and you just see just some of the, a few of the reviews of what people found valuable from this text, from this book. And then also I mentioned earlier that there is an online course. So if you want to actually now put in the work and walk away with something tangible with your own services, export plan, and strategy, so that we can move away from just the learning, the discussing it, bringing awareness to this topic and becoming educated about it, but now actually taking action and doing something. So there is a course, it's on my website. You see the link there. It's an on-demand course. You can just download it, take it at your own time, your own pace within a year. And you see the structure of the course to really walk you through some of the things that I've shared here in more detail, and you can test your knowledge. But it's not about testing your knowledge, it's about you having something tangible once you complete this course. And then finally, if you want to meet with me, just schedule a one-on-one advisory session. You can email me. My contact information is on the next slide, but that's another way just to kind of learn about your particular business and what your goals are. Here is my contact information. Okay, I see you, Christopher. Just one quick thing, and then I'm going to open it up to discussion. And then also I'm going to I would love for your feedback in that this is a topic that's not covered often, and I want to make sure that this provides a lot of value to all of my audiences. So I will put the link. I would love it's just 3 quick questions of how you view the information in today's session. Okay. Thank you so much.
This is great, Sarita. Thank you very much. Going back to one of your earlier points, the classification for services, we had a B2B. We did a League of Opportunities with a B2B platform at the end of the year, and they were using so business could classify themselves using their NAIC codes. And I had a lot of services a lot of members with the service background that they didn't know how to use it or how to find themselves, and they would think that it was impossible. They was all like about products like fruits or auto parts,
Yes.
or but there was, I got in there, I helped them, and there's a code for everything, pretty much everything. And so a lot of our IT guys, so it was very interesting, because you could pick like what you do is more like IT software, and who you serve, and you can find like legal services, accounting,
Yes.
so everything is classified. And I think that was a really interesting point to hear today.
Yes. Yes, thank you
uh,
so much. And that's the one, the next code is one. And then there's another one specifically for international trade as well. But that's a start with the next code, just how you classify your service, especially when you're going after some of these funding opportunities. That's the question they ask is, okay, so, how do you classify yourself? And then there are specific numbers just for import export that comes out. These are numbers with databases that includes information from the World Trade Organization and the United Nations combined, and they have numbers just if you're looking at the trends. But no, that is a great point. Thank you for raising that, Cesar.
no, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of people that are not aware, so it is important to touch on that. I think any questions? I see a lot of comments in the chat. I see Christopher. Welcome, Christopher.
Hey, thank you, Cesar. Hey, thank you, Dr. Jackson. Awesome presentation. Really, you stoked a lot of thoughts in my mind. I've been serving in the Global Chamber for a number of years now, but what I want to ask you is, when you think about the Global Chamber, what drew you to this global tribe? And then we also have a campaign that we've been authorized to do in Global Chamber called Making Global Local. And I think a part of your presentation, really, you're encouraging the professional service class to be able to see the opportunities that maybe in the past we weren't really seeing for ourselves, to be able to bring our services into Africa, into Asia, into Europe. So thank you again for your presentation. But if you can just hit on, what drew you to Global Chamber.
So what drew me to Global Chamber was really to connect with people that are internationally minded or globally minded. I've been a part of a number of different networking organizations, but one of the obstacles that I often faced was really connecting with people that were doing international business and understood international trade, particularly because global business or international business is very broad. But when it comes to international trade, a lot of times I would just kind of get blank stares, like, I'm not quite sure what you're telling me. So that was always a challenge that I faced with, I could talk about global business, but then it was, oh, well, because I'm, some of the individuals that I interacted with, well, my client is from another country and they want to set up a company here in the United States. But when it came to international trade, it was really, from my experience, it was difficult to connect with people that understood, the importing and the exporting, and where they were doing it themselves, not just advising on it, but where they were doing it themselves one way or another. And now, granted, here we go with the services, they were, but they're not thinking that I'm involved in international trade. So when I came to, actually, it was someone that was working with me, and she says, hey, I heard about this global chamber. I attended one of the events. Let me connect you with Doug Bronke. And when I talked to him, and when he made connections with different individuals right off the bat, I could see the value. When I attended meetings, then I said, this is where I need to be. If they're talking about import, export, international trade, not just global business in terms of what's happening legally or accounting or things like that, or if I want to set up a company, but really the international trade, that's what drew me to Global Chamber.
Thank you so much. And that's a wonderful response. And again, I think that this was an amazing presentation. Thank you so much. Look forward to connecting with. What's your book? You said you had a book.
Oh, yes. International Trade and Services. I can put that slide back up. Yeah, I can put that slide up just briefly. Let me just go We share, and yeah, just so you'll have the full title. And you can, let's see, can we see that from current slide? There we go. That's the book.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Go out and buy it today.
Oh, fabulous. Then I look forward to your feedback once you read it. Thank you, Christopher. Okay. Okay, any other
Thank you.
questions?
Thank you, Sarita. Can you drop the link? I have the link, the Amazon link. I can drop it for you if
Oh,
it's okay.
yes, please. Yes, thank you.
Okay, I will drop it. Any other questions, comments from the members or audience here today?
I have a question. Dr. Jackson, how frequently do you interact with the District Export Council in Chicago?
Well, not the one in Chicago. I do interact with the district export councils here where I'm located in Los Angeles, and then the
okay.
individuals, there's one in the Inland Empire east of Los Angeles. So I do interact with them quite often. And I do that. I'm just also putting, in case anybody's interested in the course here, and the way that I do that is through another organization that I'm involved in, Women in International Trade, Orange County, where we do a lot of work with them. And even when I was with Women in International Trade Los Angeles, where we would do a lot of partnering.
Do you involve Terry Batch in her new capacity in any of your activity?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned Terry Batch because she was there when I asked the question at the event I was talking about. That's how I met her. When I asked about services, when I said, hey, what about international trade and services? It was an event where Terry was there. This was back in, don't quote me on this, around 2014, something like that, 2014, 2015. And that's how I met her, and then told her about, my interest in really promoting international trade and services. But yes, we speak regularly.
Oh, you're on mute, Eric.
She was my intern when I worked for Secretary Brown 200
Oh,
years
wow.
ago.
Let me
I
see.
love Terry.
Okay. I'm trying to see who see who's speaking here. Gave it to, say that again. She was your intern when you were working. Oh, really?
Yeah,
Secretary.
I used to run the entire commercial service when I was thin and had hair. So a long time ago when I worked for President Clinton and Secretary Brown.
Oh,
But
beautiful.
there is someone you should connect with. Have you been in touch with the new commercial attaché for the U.S. at the World Bank? Is
No.
a Black female, and they're doing minority activity in World Bank, IDB, African Development Bank activity. So one thing, since we're talking about international trade, one thing that I tell many of my friends around the world who say, well, why don't U.S. companies invest? I remind them that we're relational. So most people don't invest until they've traded. I asked people, do you think
Yes,
Toyota
thank
would
you.
set up a factory in your country if they hadn't sold 30,000 vehicles first? So I encourage all of our friends that are with the chamber in countries around the world to think about trading with U.S. companies, and that's the way they can trigger financing from the U.S. But I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, that point, because I think about some conversations, when I first went out on my own, started my own company. And that was the question I would always get. It would just jump to investment. And I said, it's a nice topic, but how do you know if this is someplace where you want to invest if you haven't even just started buying and selling without the full investment in a country? So I focus, and that's what I would explain to them. I would focus on, just the buying and selling, that transaction. Then we talk about investment. And in my book, I do mention I do have figures with regard to investment, but it's just that initial transaction through international trade. So I really appreciate you for bringing that up, Eric, because yeah, that was one of the things that I often had to explain when I would talk about international trade to individuals, and they would just jump to the investment. And it's like you're skipping over investment is a commitment, but just starting out with the international trade, see if this is a good market, see if you're going to really sell, and not just a one-off, like I sold here and I sold over there, but that you've done so over a sustainable period of time. Okay, all right. Oh, thank you, Ruby. I saw the clap. Thank you so much, Ruby. Glad to see you on the call. Any other?
Just before, Eric, if you can leave your contact details in the chat and we can make sure that you and Sarita are connected, that would be great.
Will do. Let's see, I'll put it in here now.
Thanks. Sarita, you also talk about blockchain, and that's actually the reason why I invited Ling Shang, our member from New York, and she's on the call. And Ling, sorry to put you on the spot. I don't know if you're available to say a few words, but last time we checked, you were interested in, like, you were learning about, I think it's Southeast Asia. That's really the region that's probably best for your product. So, Ling, if you can say a few words,
Sure.
and that would be great.
Hi, absolutely. Thank you for inviting me. And Sarita, great presentation. It's so wonderful to know that there's so much more opportunity to export services, because that's exactly what my company help overseas exporter to the US, because US is the largest importer in the whole world. And we use blockchain to make sure that it's a trustworthy platform. So all the financing process is transparent to the parties through transaction. And very importantly is that the algorithm cannot be manipulated to advantage certain parties. So it's a nice solution to work with the logistics shipping network that uses supply chain to do track and trace.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, to make it more secure. And then, as you mentioned, also from the finance side. So thank you so much. But let's definitely connect, because I would love to talk to you more about that, because I do follow to just continue to see, just like with now everyone's talking about the AI, but to really see what is really working, not just, oh, this is what people are talking about and I'm just going to throw it out there, but to see what's working and in what manner it is working, and if there's anything also that we need to be aware of with these different technologies. So thank you so much. So I would love to connect as well.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Eric. I see your information in the chat.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Ruby, I see.
Hi, thank you. Great presentation. And thanks for mentioning Ghana. The figures are correct. There's a lot going on within the service industry here. Just to say that I am based in Accra, Ghana. Anyone interested in my market, please feel free to reach out. Thank you, Dr. Sarita. It was really great today. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Ruby. And yeah, and I do encourage, if you're interested in Ghana, to definitely reach out to Ruby, because she's my contact for any client that has any questions about Ghana. I send them her way. So, so I appreciate you being on the call and for your comments. Thank you so much, Ruby.
Thank you, Ruby. Thank you, Ling. Anyone else? I know, Sarita, I need to follow up with you, because this is really a topic that I love. And actually, when I did a master, I did a project on international trade of services for the Caribbean. It was something very simple, but we are planning to do a Caribbean call in April. So I want to keep you posted, because I know when it comes to services, like small nations are top, they depend a lot on services. So I will definitely keep you posted. And I heard you don't work with the Caribbean, so I look forward to learning more on that.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yes, and you're absolutely right. Yeah, when it comes to the Caribbean, many of the Caribbean countries, that, yeah, services is a huge one, and especially, I mean, for tourism, but other types of services as well. Thank you.
Back then they were doing a lot of gambling and
yes.
kind of stuff like that, based in Antigua and Rhode Island. It was interesting. I see Rasit from Turkey. Rasit, go ahead. Make sure you unmute yourself, please.
All right. Thank you, Caesar. I believe you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarita, for the professional and brief presentation about service exporters. My name is Rashid. I am invited by Miss Ruby. Thank you, Ruby. I am also founder of a international business club called Turnkey. I added you, Sarita. Maybe we can collaborate something like you can help Turkish service exporters to go into American market, such as healthcare, education consultancy. We have a very good healthcare system. Maybe they may receive some patients from USA. Also, maybe some students who are willing to discover Turkey and Turkish culture. Thank you very much. I added you from LinkedIn. Stay in touch, please.
Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you. I definitely will. I'll reach out.
Thank you, Rashid. Can you please leave your contact details in the chat as well?
I did already.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you. Sarita, we probably need to start wrapping up, but I want to give you the last 2 or 3 minutes so you can close it up and say a few words about what's coming up and maybe other events, any other book coming up for you, anything. Please feel free to share.
Okay, well, just in wrapping up, just watch out, join my newsletter. Let me, if I can just quickly, I'll put my website and then it'll pop up to subscribe to my newsletter so that you can stay abreast of all of the upcoming events, because I will be having some LinkedIn audio events. But for now, I mean, just to get more information, check out the book, the online course as well, I put in the chat. And yeah, let's keep this conversation going about international trade and services. And then, also Cesar, I see you put the thing for the Spanish language global chamber, and we do have a Spanish language version of the same seminar coming up in September. So just watch out for that if you want to come listen to it again in Espanol.
Yes, no, Sarita is fully bilingual, so she's amazing. She's been part of our Spanish calls, and she will be presenting about this in September. That's right. So, and yeah, speaking of that, I'm just jumping into the Spanish one to moderate. That's whoever speaks Spanish, or if someone in your team speaks Spanish, please send them over to us, and we're having really good conversations monthly. And so again, thank you, Sarita. Thank you, everyone. I think it's been a very interesting conversation that definitely deserves a follow-up. So we'll be in touch.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Have a
See
good
everyone
one. Take
soon.
care.
Okay, bye-bye.